This video is all about negative space. Negative space as a concept can seem a little bit confusing, but it's important to know that all it is just drawing with shadow. So instead of drawing the objects in a scene, you're drawing the shadows that those objects cast. And so we're going to go ahead with the most simple example that I can think of, and that is just a bunch of debris on the ground. And so I'm going to draw some interconnected rectangular shapes. These could be 2x4s, and I'm just layering them together. So this one is below this one, and maybe I'll have this one coming from below this one and then going over this one. And so let me erase that through. And I'm just lightly sketching in some shapes on the ground, and that's really all that I need. And so now what I have there are some interconnected shapes, and it all works fine. But what we want to do, I'm going to lighten this down, and I'm going to light this one from above. And so what I want to do is just draw a shadow along the side of each object that's away from the light. And so I don't really see my actual shapes. I can see them just fine when I'm drawing. I've gotten them lightened down enough that I can see them. But all that I'm really drawing are just the shadows. And this is really stage one of the process. Just drawing a shadow on the underside of each object and keeping it very, very simple. And so that, in effect, is negative space drawing, but it's only really one step of it. These objects are also going to cast shadows. So this is the shadow on the object itself, but it's going to cast a shadow below. So I'm going to draw a shadow below this shape here, casting a shadow onto the ground below. And I'm breaking the shadow where other objects are. I'm going to have a shadow in here, another shadow below the object right here. I'm going to draw a shadow under this one. This shadow is thinner because this object is closer to the ground. The further away you are from the ground, the bigger your shadow is going to be. And this one is riding up pretty high, so I'm going to draw the shadow quite a bit further. And again, the further away it is from the ground, the further my shadow will be. Shadow onto this one. And that brings us to the next stage, and you can see things are much more described here. Now what I want to do is cast shadows from one object to another. And so I'm going to cast a shadow onto this piece here, onto this piece here. This one here is below this one, so it's going to be a little bit thicker here, because again, the further away I am from the object I'm casting onto, the deeper my shadow. This shadow here, and you can see I've already created a problem for myself. I'm going to have to fix this. And see, what I want to do, my shadow is going to cast along the face of this object, so it's going to travel more like this. And this object is raised up from the ground, so that one will be high enough that the shadow would be way over here. And I think that'd be a little bit more accurate. I'm going to cast a shadow onto this piece here, small shadow onto this piece here. You really didn't need to do anything there. And that is my whole wood pile. I haven't drawn any of the actual wood shapes at all. All I've done is drawn the shapes of the shadow, and that is the essence of negative space drawing. And so from here, we're going to take a bit more of a practical example, and we're going to draw a window. And so in the interest of time, I'm not going to rule this out. I'm just going to draw as close as I can to straight lines to define my window. All right, so here's my window. I've drawn it all in. This is just a line drawing. It's very important to note, and you can really see it with this shape here, that I'm not just drawing flat shapes. These are dimensional shapes, and so I'm really drawing cubes, really for everything. So here's a cube here. If I draw a piece up here, this is going to be a much thinner cube. I don't want to just draw a flat shape. I'm drawing it as a cube. And so you can see it has dimension, and all my shapes need to have dimension. That's a common mistake that I see with samples from somebody that's not very experienced is they'll draw windows, and their windows will just be drawn like simple flat shapes just like this. And ultimately that looks very phony, and it's very easy to fix just by creating a little bit of dimension by drawing the insides of those cubes and drawing the actual proper angle. And just that alone really gives that window, and it's a poorly drawn simple window, but it gives it more dimension than it had just as a simple shape. And it's a little bit more work, but this is what goes into making your work look more professional. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to lighten this window down, and we're going to draw this just with negative shapes. And so I'm going to light this one. I think it'd be most convenient for me to light it from here. And that means that I'm going to have a shadow all on the underside of my sill. And the easiest way for me to approach this is to just draw my undersides first. And so I've got a shadow here. I've got a shadow here. I've got one here. And I'm just methodically going through and getting the easiest shapes to find in. I've got a shadow under this piece here. And that's going to be all of my shapes pointing downward. And you can see already that has quite a bit of dimension. But because I lit it from the right, and I did that specifically so I could darken these. And it's important to know that a lot of times when you're lighting, you want to think about the things that you're lighting and light them in the way that is going to describe your shape, your form. Whoops, that's really not what I wanted there. And you can see I kind of came off. What I want is that's going to end there. I'm going to see nothing there. And then this is a separate layer on top. Just like that. Got a shape right here. This is my shadow from the window surround. Got a shadow here. And then this shadow extend down through here. I'm going to give it a little lip of shadow right here. And this will be shadowed here. And I could really leave it there. There is a window drawn entirely just with shadow. The one last thing that I want to do, though, is cast my shadow. So I'm going to cast a shadow down from this piece here. This is projecting pretty far out. And that's really going to be it. None of these other shapes are really going to cast a heavy shadow that will obscure things that are behind it. And that is how you can draw a much more realistic window and only draw the shadow. And there are artists that devote their entire style to this kind of approach. It's very, very effective. Frank Miller does this incredibly well. And just to make sure, I'm going to erase out anything that is a line and isn't a shadow. And that's my window defined entirely with shadow. And now in the next example, I'm going to draw one of my absolute favorites. This is going to be the top of a shoe, and I'm only going to draw the laces for this. And so to draw my laces, I'm going to cross. I'll have, these are my holes that the laces go into, and they're rounded around this overall form. I'm going to draw a lace from here to here, a lace from here to here, and then draw out my bow at the top. And now I need to draw a lace from here to here, and this is going to cross under the one that I did first. I could do it the other way, but doing it this way really doesn't matter. And that gives you your whole lace effect. And now I'm going to draw the edge of the fabric of my shoe, just like that. But it looks very, very unrealistic, and it's not very satisfying. And my favorite way to do this is to really use negative space. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw a shadow underneath this lace here. I'm going to leave a gap where I have the lace below. I've got this piece here. And I'm going to draw a line there, so it's going to cover, but you can see that's a much thinner line, and it instantly looks like there's something underneath it. It gives it a lot of volume very, very quickly and easily. Thicker shadow here, thinner here, thicker again below. Thicker here. I've got the edge of my fabric here, so I'm going to go thinner and then thicker again. I'm butting up against the edge of my fabric here, so I'm going to go thinner and then thick again. And I've basically got one side defined, and now I'm going to do the other side underneath. And I've got this side riding over this side. And I just broke my rule by drawing a line there. I'll have to erase it. And there's my laces just defined with shadow. I'm going to draw the edge of where my laces meet here. I think I had this side over this. And now I'm going to draw, these are circular shapes like this, but I find it's much more effective if I draw the shadow under here and the shadow under here and just leave it like that. You can see how that looks much, much cooler. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that here. Here's another one here. I barely have these drawn in, but really I know the shape that I'm going for, so it's pretty easy for me to just define these with shadow. There's another one here. My lace crosses in there, so I can kind of see it in there. And I'm just drawing the shadows all the way through. Now, I've also got the edge of my fabric, and on this side I'm going to define that as a bit of a shadow underneath here. And I'm just pushing backward. I started with the top layer, the secondary layer, and then a third layer underneath. I'm going to leave this light. This is pointed up toward the light, but what I will do is give it a little bit of a lip with shadow here. And that's it. And that's all done just with shadowing and drawing, none of the actual object. Now I'm going to do the same thing with my lace. It's going to cast a shadow over the lace below, thicker here, and it's kind of extending away from the shoe, so I'm going to drop that down here. Shadow underneath these bits, underneath here. And the way that I've drawn that, they're rested completely against the surface below, and the way that I've drawn this, it's lifted. And I can do the same thing with this one here. I'll draw it. So that also lifts that shape there. And now I could go through and I could detail the rest of this, but it gives me a really good solid shadow pattern. Very, very simple to understand. And that's how I can use negative space to do something like laces or a lot of this sort of detail. It's a very, very effective technique. And so for our last example, I'm going to draw a face. And so there's my face, very, very simply drawn. It's just a sketch, and I'm going to lighten this down. And I could light this face from a lot of different angles. I have a tendency to light from the left-hand side pointing toward the right, so my shadow would be off here. I think for this one, I'm going to follow a theme, and I'm going to come on to this angle. And so I don't have any detail here at all. You can see it on the screen because I don't want to erase it to the point where I can't see what I'm working with. But I'm going to draw a shadow on this side of the nose, on the underside. So now I'm going to draw his eyebrow in. I have a shadow underneath that eye. It's going to pool up in the corners. I'm just going to draw the eye dark. Shadow under this eye, eyebrow. It's going to pool up in that corner, this corner. Draw the other eye dark again. For my mouth, I just want to draw the shadow. So just underneath the top lip, where it connects to the bottom lip. Got a bit of pool up a shadow here, again here. Shadow underneath the bottom lip. And I think I would actually make this a little bit stronger. Let me fix that. I'm going to draw, because this would be more away from the light and we'll see more of it. And then this will be quite a bit thinner. So it points a little bit more up to the light. I think that'll look a little bit better. Underneath the eye, on the lower lid, I've got a shadow here. Same on this eye. I'm going to run a shadow along the shape of my cheek. And we're just going to shadow this whole area out. Now I've got quite a bit of area here that really should be shadowed. It's well away from the light. I could make a choice to make this dark. It really could be, but I tend to feel like that closes the face in a little too much. So I'm going to leave it for now. And you'll find you have an area right here that can angle away from the light, and that can be dark too, but that can also really, really start to overshadow the face. So I'm going to leave that alone and just leave that lit. But this is really just working with planes. You'll find a lot of great reference, like maquettes and that kind of thing that you can find online and with different light sources, or you can just buy a simple head maquette yourself and point light at it and use that for reference. There are a lot of options when it comes to really sorting out the shapes that you use to define your shadows on faces. Now I'm going to have a shadow cast underneath the chin. And I've got my light coming from here, so really my shadow should actually cast quite a bit lower, but I don't like to cover my entire neck, generally speaking. And so I cheat it, unless I really, really want to get something very dark. I have a bit of a tendency on certain things to cheat my shadow just a little bit smaller than it really probably should be. But that's a bit of a trial and error thing, so take that with a grain of salt. You have to do really what works for you. Shadow underneath the Adam's apple, and a bit of a shadow for my other neck muscle. And that's my whole face defined just with shadow. I really haven't drawn any kind of line work. There's nothing defined on the nose. I don't have this line defined. It's just shadow. And actually, I'm looking at this. I need to cast a shadow from my nose onto my face. And this should be darker in here. And that really is just me using shadow patterns. There are no actual lines there at all. It's just shadow shapes. This is something that you see used very, very effectively by artists like Alex Toth or Frank Miller. Frank Miller will go for more of an aggressive style when he does this. And something that can be very effective is I actually can draw in the outline of my face just by putting a shadow behind it. And so I still have no line work or defined lines on my face, but just drawing in my shadow on the other side of the face, I'm defining in a lot of that shape just using simple black shapes. And the more you can break down your work into simple shapes of light and dark, the more effective graphically it will be. And then when you hang your rendering and detail and all those other things on it, you'll be hanging it on something that is visually very effective in really simple terms. And so that really is all there is to negative space lighting. It seems like a very complex thing and something that can be a little bit confusing, but in practice, it really is just drawing the shadows and defining purely with shadow. So that's going to wrap it up for this one. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you every Monday night for our Monday Night Draw live stream with Meredith and Dave, and I will see you in the next video.